Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week we have a double feature episode as the creative team behind the recently wrapped series The Sixth Gun and the soon-to-be revived The Damned at Oni Press. It's Brian, Hurtt and Cullen Bunn. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Thanks for having us.
All right, glad to be here.
So when you say double feature, does that mean it's twice as long, or you're just getting two for the price of one?
Two for the price of one. It remains to be seen as to how long it'll be, but we'll see. But I was thinking more just two for the price of one. But, so guys, there are a bunch of things I want to talk to you about project-wise, because I was a huge fan of The Sixth Gun, and I'm really excited about The Damned coming back. But I want to start with a beautiful place in your life, I'm sure. How you guys first met. And I'm hoping for some sort of, rom-com style meet-cute, which may or may not be what happens. But I want to ask, how did you guys first meet? Let's start with you,
Very
Brian.
close. Online dating.
eHarmony?
eHarmony, yeah.
I was actually going to say we met on a dating website, but I realized that we met so long ago that there were no dating websites.
There were. We met in the classifieds.
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Like creeps.
Missed connections. It was missed connections.
You angry Southern man at the mall yelling at that lady. Me. At the Walden Books, that's what I should have said.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love Walden Books. Or I loved Walden Books, I guess. Past tense.
Helen, didn't you work there, or did you work at B. Dalton?
No, I worked at Walden Books. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks
I'm
for
sorry,
screwing that up, Brian.
Oh, God. The relationship is breaking on this podcast. I feel so bad already.
No, we actually met. We both worked at the same comic book store.
Oh.
I should say, actually, we worked at the same comic book chain. I don't think we ever worked in the same location. Did we, Colin?
I mean, a day or two here or there, but most of the time, no. We worked for the same chain, and Brian was this weirdo that would send drawings, doodles on the fax machine when they're faxing in, how the stores did at the end of the night. He would fax in little drawings of bombs, and I don't know what the bomb was, but I remember he drew a bomb once. But that's my first encounter with Brian, was him drawing fax machine bombs and sending them to me.
I completely forgot about the fax machine. That's true. I did. I especially on a slow night, I'd be on the phone with Cullen, or I had another friend there, Kip, and I'd be on the phone with these guys. And then if they're in their shops and it's slow, I'd be faxing them ideas and sketches or just messing around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's amazing. So what you guys were having your you guys are having your fax machine romance for the comic creators, but I'm curious, what was it appealed to you to about how each of you thought about stories? I mean, Cullen, were you just really into fax machine bomb pictures, or
I was. Well, the real the sort of the answer that probably most people would give is, well, I was a writer looking for an artist, and Brian was an artist. That's not exactly true, though. I mean, initially it is true. I as a person who wanted to write comics, finding someone who was a talented artist was a big deal, and that was exciting. But I think soon enough, Brian and I started talking about stories, and I don't know if I can pinpoint any one thing that just where we clicked. I just feel like we clicked on a lot of we had a lot of the same sensibilities in terms of storytelling. I think maybe we both really liked to do a lot of world building, and I think that might have been one of the initial things that allowed us to have sort of a staying power of to actually end up doing projects together, rather than what so many other would-be collaborators experience, which is they sort of they go their separate way. The projects fizzle out and they go their separate ways. Mm-hmm. But I feel like we both had a lot of same sensibility story-wise, and probably the world-building thing was the first thing for me that I think that I could probably pinpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's likewise. It's not. I mean, I don't think either of us is going to date ourselves and actually tell you when we met, but I will say that it's been a long time, but yeah, I never felt like I don't remember there being a moment where I was like, oh yeah, this guy and I, we need to work together. But we just sort of seemed like we had a friendship that sort of grew as we
Mm-hmm.
worked, we hung out more, and then of course we're both comic fans. We start talking about like, well, what would you do if you could do a comic? And and one thing leads to another, and but I mean, we knew each other uh, for a while before we even did our first pitch, 6 or 7 years, I would think, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, easily. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't you guys had a first pitch before you did pitched the Damned, right? Like there was something
We
before
did.
that.
We did.
Yes, there was. Colin, did you put that on your website?
It is on my website. I think it's still on the website. Yeah, we pitched a supernatural horror story set in Victorian England called Penny Dreadful.
Nice.
And that was
Soundly rejected. Oh,
well, it was soundly rejected because of course no one wants to read a Victorian England horror story called Penny Dreadful. That's never going to catch on in any way, shape, or form anywhere.
Yeah,
But,
It's
may
so
or may not have
far-fetched.
Cthulhu sort of mythos, and yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, it was pretty soundly rejected.
Well,
I
to be
think years
fair-
later they came back and said, "Do you guys still want to do that pitch?" But we were already on to other projects. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and I was told at a later date that by the publisher that if you guys had really argued for it, we probably would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, I mean, it's for the best that didn't happen because all these other great sort of things happened. And I know just speaking for myself, I wasn't ready to do that book.
Mm-hmm.
Drawing a Victorian book at the skill level I was at, or a book that takes place in Victorian, that would have been it would have probably killed me.
we thought we could do it though.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying we we absolutely thought we could do it.
Well, confidence is key. Although I feel like the Victorian architecture would have been a pain in the ass.
Oh, and I'm just, I love drawing backgrounds and stuff. And the Victorians, I mean, the aesthetic was clutter.
Mhm.
So, I was drawing. I found myself getting hung up when we were putting together the pitch. I got hung up on research. It was actually kind of paralyzing because I would be like, okay, now I got to draw a couple lamps in this room. All right, let me go find lamps that are era appropriate, and then like, oh wait, that one is probably been made 10 years too late for this scene.
Mhm.
So I found myself basically worrying about things I shouldn't have been worried about,
Right.
And I've learned to look past these things, obviously working on other period pieces. But yeah, at the time, I felt like I had to be accurate on everything. I was looking at floor plans for, buildings in London during the time and what kitchens looked like and how they worked. And it was a lot of work and kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing is like people don't think about like the level of detail you have to get into. And, I don't want to presume anything, but that sounds like it might have been before like Google Images. So you might have had to look at books or things like that.
Oh yeah, no, I
It was
probably have.
books.
I had a file cabinet with photocopies.
What?
Yes, from the library. I'd go to the library and find all these books, and I'd make lots of photocopies and create files. And yeah, I still have them somewhere.
So if you guys ever want to go back and,
Yes.
it may work. The Penny Dreadful thing could be an idea. But, I wanted to ask because, obviously.
Except that title.
What's that?
Yes, I said nothing's dead except for that title. Obviously, we can't use that.
Clearly. But I mean, you guys are both storytellers, and I'm sure this ranges from project to project. But you guys have been working together for a long time, and this may have even evolved past that. But like, how do you guys work? Like when you're like breaking down a project, when you guys are getting back into the Damned, for example, do you guys kind of like hash it out all out from the start, or do you guys kind of each have your hats, or how do you guys work together?
I'll let Cullen take the lead on that, and then I'll correct them.
Oh, well, you know what? Brian just described how it goes. I think. No, I'm just, it's different for every project.
Right.
I mean, I can trace it back. If we talk about, say, The Damned, for instance, Brian called me, and the first we talked about that book, he called me and said, "Hey, Cullen, I want to do a book, and I want to do something dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an idea for a character." And he described our main character, Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
He described Eddie, and he described Eddie's curse that he had. And then we just started spitballing, where we would go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it wasn't like a period,
No, yeah, we were just it didn't start out as necessarily
picture,
a gangland story.
it was nothing like that. We didn't know what it was, honestly. But
but we just came together over the course of a phone call, in an hour and a half or so, starting with that, that bare bones, and that was us just talking it out and figuring out what we wanted to do, and then after that, I think I put together some ideas for a story, and I sent it to Brian, and he sent it back with his ideas, and we kind of created sort of a living document that then eventually became a formal pitch for the series. And I may be wrong. I might be remembering wrong. For The Damned, I seem to remember that coming together like over the course of a couple of days after that first phone call.
Yeah, I honestly don't. It's been such a long time. The only thing I could tell, I remember I had the Eddie character, but I didn't have a name for him or anything, but I had the basic concept of Eddie. I do remember that because he was an amalgamation of a couple characters I had from my sketchbook. That I've been playing around with for a while. But I think that's all I had. And I knew I wanted to do something. I think Cullen and I were kind of on the same page about this. I knew I wanted to do something not just dark, but I wanted to do something that is fantastical, but yet grounded.
Right.
If that makes sense. And that's because I've been doing, when I got into comics, my dream at least, I thought, okay, I'm going to be a penciler and I'm going to draw whatever. I'm going to draw Spider-Man if I'm lucky, or, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But pretty quickly after I started getting into it, I didn't really have that interest for the superhero stuff. I wanted to do my own stories, and I wanted to. I ended up finding out that I had to ink myself as well, so I was learning a lot of things on the fly. But what I was getting at is I ended up doing a bunch of books that weren't what I thought I'd be doing. I was doing crime books. I was doing and spy books. I did Queen and Country and. A book called Skinwalker and Three Strikes. I did a bunch of these things. I even did a fill-in on Gotham Central. And these were all fun, but these were not the kind of books I got into, or the sort of stories I got into comics to tell. I wanted to push things a little further towards the fantastical. And so I wanted something that was kind of a stepping stone in a way. So something that was familiar to me, but also just a step apart into that sort of realm, if that makes any sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and that kind of fits The Damned to a T, which I actually have to admit I just read for the first time, to prep for this, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
I actually, I'm proud of the book. I feel, at least from a story point of view, I feel like it holds up.
Yeah. I mean, and it is interesting to see. And that's one of the things I'm interested in is like how you guys have kind of progressed from there, because. To bring up the Six Gun, I wanted to talk about something that you had written in the back of the final trade, Colin. It might have been in the final issue too, but it was the write-up you did where you to paraphrase, you said, you talked about how much the story had evolved from the beginning, but to paraphrase what you said, Drake was evil, General Oleander, Bedford Hume didn't exist, and the Six Gun was intended to be like this super dark horror story, which, was not what I read. I mean, it's not really reflective of that necessarily. So, to steal a line from you, Colin, how the hell did that happen? And how fluid do you guys try to be as you're, developing a comic?
Well, the Six Gun, it has sort of a
long and strange history.
Yeah, it has a really strange history of how it all how it all came together and how it actually even the fact that we were able to do 50 plus issues of the Six Gun based on where it all started from still baffles me.
Yeah, it's a miracle.
Because Brian was there, right when I first came up with the initial idea for the Six Gun, and I shared the idea with him. I said, "This is what I want. This is the kind of book I want to do," and he even drew. I think it's in one of the hardcover collections or something, but he even drew like the very first image that of Drake Sinclair, but he wasn't going to draw the book because he didn't have time to draw it. He was working on other projects.
Well, and I'll be honest. At the time, I couldn't afford to draw it either. It was going to be an Oni book, and the basic rate. I had credit card debt. Yeah. And the basic rate wasn't going to cover my bills, and I wanted to do it, but it just wasn't possible. I had to sort of finish up other jobs and pursue that sort of work.
Right. And I found another artist who was interested in drawing the book, but just for various reasons couldn't commit to it, really. He wanted to draw it, but couldn't commit to it. and I even pitched the book to Oni Press in the initial format, and we've shared all this somewhere before, right, Brian? I can say these.
No,
I mean,
no, I'm all about being
So I pitched it to Oni Press, and they turned it down flat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they said it's just not the book for us. Not, I don't know, a couple of months after that, I think they had a meeting in Hollywood, and before the meeting, their agent guy said, "All right, before we go in here, the only thing we don't ever want to talk about are supernatural westerns, because that's not what anybody wants to hear." And they didn't have one anyway, But they went and they sat down, and one of the first things out of the producer's mouth was, "What I'm really interested in is a supernatural western."
And to James Lucas's credit, the editor in chief, he perked right up and pitched the Six Gun.
Wow, really?
So he pitched the Six Gun, and then they called me, and they said, "Hey, have you done anything with this book, The Six Gun? We might be interested in doing something with it, and what do you think about Brian Hurtt drawing it?" And I was like, wait, hold on a second, what's going on with this? Why the sudden interest, and why are we looking at maybe being able to bring Brian on?
Mm-hmm.
And they came out and they explained everything, and then I didn't think Brian was going to be able to do it for the reasons he had already said, but because of the Hollywood interest, Oni was willing to put a little more money behind the project. Not a lot, but a little more.
Definitely not a lot. They said exactly. They actually asked me at one point, "How much do you need? Absolutely need to live, to survive?" I gave a number, and that's exactly how much I got paid.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then it was a very exciting time, and the producers were very big on this. Was going to be a big thing for them. It was going to be a 3-movie. It was three movie project.
I think they're kind of looking at it as this is going to be our next Pirate of the Caribbean.
Oh.
Yes, that's what they told us. And they kept getting on the phone with us, and they'd say things, we like this pitch, but we need it to be bigger. We need it to be bigger. And it was unusual, I guess, but they were letting Brian and I they would come to us and say, "Make it bigger," and we would just start adding elements to the story. And going in these crazy directions, because they kept saying, "Make it bigger, make it bigger."
And I'll say for Cullen and I, those are kind of magical words. That's like our wheelhouse. We always want to make things bigger.
Yeah,
right.
So that wasn't a problem.
No, it did get. I mean, I have somewhere. I've looked at it within the past 6 months. The original pitch, what I call not the original pitch for the comic book, but the pitch Brian and I put together for the movie, the concept for the movie, and it's insane. I mean, it's the craziest thing you would. I mean,
it would have been so bad.
It would have been terrible, but those conversations where we were talking about adding these weird elements. I mean, there were ninjas and ninja witches and trains made of gold and all sorts of crazy things we were trying to add into this, because they just kept saying, make it bigger.
And my favorite note, what was that, Cullen?
I can't. Was it? We need treasure?
Yeah.
They kept telling us we need treasure, and we would say, "Well, we've got the Six Gun. That's the MacGuffin, And they said, "No, we need treasure. We need silver and gold."
Like gold was really in back then, I guess.
Right, gold.
That's the Pirates connection.
Because the pirates and national treasure and all these sort of things, and they just had this idea like it has to be a hunt for this treasure. No, I mean, what was interesting is about really very quickly. I remember Cullen and I calling the publisher and being like, "Okay, this is getting kind of crazy.
Right.
I hope there's no expectation that this is not the comic book we're going to do." And again, to their credit, they're like, "Oh no. You tell the movie studio whatever you need to tell them."
Yeah.
But you guys don't have to do anything you don't want to do in your own comic, and that was the agreement early on. And so then we just kind of had fun with it. But I think the surprising thing was that some good ideas did come out of all this ridiculousness.
You mean like all the treasure, right?
Well, the treasure, yes. But it came down. We started really talking about this. Really expanding the world and expanding the story for this movie pitch. But that got us thinking about how to expand the Six Gun beyond what was originally, in my intent, a very finite story. It was, it was a 6-issue and done story, and that really opened up a lot of doors for us. And
I mean, I don't know, maybe you disagree,
Colin.
Yeah, I was saying maybe you disagree, but it feels like that first story more than anything was a seed, but it has very little bearing other than some of the characters. It has very little bearing on what the Six Gun actually was.
It's a very different. It was a very different story.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it is amazing. Like when I was reading that wrap up you wrote, Colin, it was amazing reading that, because it's interesting from our perspective. We read the 50 issues and the spinoffs and everything like that, and that's what we think of when we think of the Six Gun. But it could have been so much different, and it's kind of amazing that that some of those elements kind of like drove you to places, or may have helped you get to places you might not have gotten otherwise if it weren't for like the movie and asking to go bigger and bigger and bigger. And like I said, that's something we don't really ever think about. And you said in the write up, and you said earlier that you guys love world building. Like, was that one of your favorite parts? Was that one of your favorite parts about the development of the Six Gun? Was like adding more mythology and adding more layers to it, and adding, we had a series of villains to the story that really, really stood out. Like, is that one of your favorite parts about that project? Because you got to do an actual long form story when we're in an era where it's actually increasingly rare for a book to go 50 issues. Yeah,
for me, I mean, we knew where the book was going to end. We knew how the story would end. But the thing that I enjoyed most about it is along the way, the things that kind of surprised us. There were some characters who jumped out of nowhere that surprised us, but from a world building perspective, I think there were some things. For me, we started with this seed that there were going to be Pinkertons in the story, and somewhere along the line, the Pinkertons formed a connection to the Knights Templar and the secret society, and that gave birth to a secret society that was opposed to them. And towards the end, it gave birth to these really crazy concepts, like this character called the King of Secrets, who really only appears very briefly in the series, but I think adds so much to the mythology as a whole, that there was this character called the King of Secrets out there, and that kind of element. Those are the elements that I think kind of excited me the most about the series. I mean, I love that we were moving towards something definite, but it was adding those little things in, and the surprises along the way that kind of, really built into the world.
Along those lines, I always think of it as kind of, sort of a blessing and a curse. It's so exciting to do the world building. We both love doing it. But then you also realize there's so many, you've got so many ideas and so many things that you're sort of introducing, that there's stuff you'll never be able to really pay service to, you know what I mean? In the way that you would like to. And basically, it was just sort of like, I don't know. I feel like we were drowning in a wealth of like a really good stuff, like really, really good creators, creations and ideas, and that we were never able to get to. But yeah, we had to keep our eye on the ball and worry about, well, what's the story, and stay on that track. But that kind of explains how some of the spinoffs came about, and that's not to say that we don't have 100 other ideas for things that could happen, would happen, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And the one thing I really like about the fact that you guys had 50 issues and you had the opportunity to do all the world building, and you got to throw in things that you might not have been able to capitalize on, like the King of Secrets came in and he was more of a mystery than he really ever was anything else. But you also, that gave you a lot of time to really build up characters, like. Even like a character like Kirby, who, for all accounts, is kind of a piece of shit. And he's a rogue and he's lovable.
I think that the term is douchebag. For sure.
Okay, douchebag. But you know what? Like Kirby is a character that like sits with me. He's like somebody that I remember, and he's somebody that stands out as a charmer. I mean, like Becky may not have fully given into his charms, but man, I did. I was a sucker for Kirby, and I love that. I love being able to like get to know these characters, because it really invests me in this world. And like Drake and Becky were some of the best leads I've read in forever. Like when it comes to developing the characters, both from an art standpoint and a writing standpoint, how important is it to find yourselves getting invested in them yourselves, so you can make us kind of care in the same way?
I feel like you have to, and I feel like I think Brian and I both have characters who are our favorites, right?
Yeah.
And I think all those characters, most of them started really with an archetype, and then we built from the archetype and started really, layering in their personalities and their histories and building that emotional connection for those characters. But no, I think it's essential that you have to be invested in the character, and at the same time you have to be willing to be really, really cruel to those characters. I feel like I really do believe that. I've said for a long time, my favorite characters are the ones who are usually going to die first or die the worst. Because I don't know what, I like my favorite things to die, I guess.
Poor Bill John.
I know. Well, Bill John was my favorite character in the series, and he bites it right away.
His star burned bright, but it went out.
Yeah, right.
Spoilers. No,
sorry.
That's right.
But I mean, for Brian, I'm curious about you. It's like you start with archetypes, but all these characters, so many different visuals, so many different like for a good example, King of Secrets stood out because that dude was, I don't really know, creepy as hell was definitely a good way to put him. But I mean, like when you're trying to build up this world where it was, the West was kind of a dirty, dusty world where everyone kind of ended up looking the same. Like, how do you make those characters stand out? And what's that?
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I mean, if you have...
Well, no, I was going to say that was part of the mission statement early on. You kind of tapped into it there when you said the West was a dirty, dusty world where everything kind of looked the same. And that's kind of how I feel like, from an aesthetic point of view, that's how a lot of Westerns look. And, we made a point very early on that this was not going to look like a Western. Like, there was not going to be any sepia tones in this book. And that we were going to embrace color, and not shy away and have a little more of a, honestly, not just like a pop sort of feel,
right?
Which is intentional, but also I know talking about it with Bill Crabtree when he came on as a colorist, I was even, and this might have been influenced from working on Penny Dreadful Pitch, but I think of some of the colors as being Victorian in a way, kind of lush and just, again, not afraid of color. It's everywhere. It's not just going to be browns and grays and blues. We wanted to. So we were, it was a conscious decision, and again, it was also sort of paying homage to the sort of comics we grew up on, the big 4-color superhero stuff. So from a point of, there's a nod to that. I mean, that explains all the big sound effects and stuff. Sound effects aren't always necessary in a comic book, but we wanted to make that kind of a comic book. Again, I don't know if I made any sense there, but that's...
No, you totally did. But, you brought up an important player that I wanted to mention. Bill Crabtree came on to color the book with issues, it was 6, right? Wasn't it 6 he came on?
Yes.
And Douglas E. Sherwood took over lettering with number 12. I think the most amazing thing was that initially you were actually doing all of that yourself, Brian. Was that because you didn't know if it was going to last past that initial 5 issues, or was it because you're secretly a megalomaniac who has to control everything?
Both of those things.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Let's be honest.
Brian answer that.
It's a little bit of both. But yeah, at the time we were still operating on a pretty, shoestring sort of budget, right?
Right.
And we didn't know. We hoped it'd be an ongoing series, but we intentionally designed it so that if it didn't sell, we at least had those 6 issues.
Sure.
And I don't know, maybe I can't speak for Cullen, but I guess in my mind, I was kind of, resigned to the fact that, well, they'll probably get canceled. And I was like, but let's at least get these 6 issues done, and they'll be awesome. And we can't really afford a good colorist. So instead of getting a bad colorist, well, I'm a bad colorist. I can do a bad job. So I work for free. So, cause I'm not sure, but I don't think I got paid for the colors. Or at least not the letters. But yeah, I just, at the early date, I didn't think that far ahead. I didn't realize, like, oh crap, we're going to get to issue 5 and we're going to realize this is definitely an ongoing, and what are we going to do then? Because there's no way I could do all this work on a monthly basis. And that's kind of what happened. I'm glad I did it. It was an awesome learning experience. It made me think about even storytelling differently, just doing the coloring and the lettering. But I was also very happy to hand it over, especially to Bill, who's just he's amazing. The guy's he's vastly underrated in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean he's like the third part of your team now. I mean he's coming over with the Damned with you guys, so it seems like whatever whatever I think about it, it seems like whatever you guys think that he brought to the Six Gun was valuable enough that he's continued to be part of your band.
Yeah, and it's because and it probably relates more directly to me because I work directly with Bill.
Sure.
But we do have it's not quite the same, but we definitely do have a collaboration, and we both enjoy the collaboration, and we both enjoy the work that comes out of it. So yeah, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So it's been pretty great. We got very lucky with Bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
just being in the right place at the right time.
And he's very, very invested in the work. It's not something that Bill's not just, a guy who came on and said, I'm going to color this project. He's in it with us, tooth and nail. He's very into the project and very into the story.
Oh, yeah. And just knowing Bill the way I know Bill at this point, if he wasn't into it, he never would have taken the job.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about how like rare it is that a project goes 50 issues. I've talked to people like I'm very friendly with John Layman and Rob Guillory, and we've talked about Chew before, and like how I mean, like a 60 issue run that's gigantic. Plus, like the one shots and everything like that. Mm-hmm. That's that's 7 years of your life. It's an incredible investment, not just in terms of like mind power, but also just time. And you have to be invested in to be able to do a run like that. Like what you guys and what Bill did when he came on.
You're absolutely right. Just to echo what you're saying, you have to. It is, especially for the artists involved. We can't. I can't take on other work really. So it's my life for the entirety of that time. That's my sole creative output. So fortunately, it was awesome, and I loved it. So, it worked out.
One thing I always end up asking about on my show is, a little bit more on the business side of things. And one of the things I really wanted to ask you guys about was, and I don't know if this was a big factor in terms of, making sure that the book ended up going past that initial like 6-issue run, but I ended up reading the comic for the same reason a lot of people did, was because it was at Free Comic Book Day. The first issue was there. And I honestly, no offense to you guys, I probably would have picked it up eventually, but I doubt I would have picked it up in single issues if it weren't for the fact that I saw it at Free Comic Book Day and I was like, damn, this looks good. I'm going to try it out. And then I was like, I'm going to buy every issue when it comes out. Why was that something? Was that something you guys wanted to make happen initially, or was that an Oni thing, or how did that come together?
Go ahead, Colin.
Well, I remember it being Oni coming to us and saying, we'd like to do this as a Free Comic Book Day book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they definitely wanted to do it as a Free Comic Book Day book. But I think very quickly we all got on the same page very quickly about just putting the whole book out there. Because at that time, most people would put like a 0 issue that might just be a short story, or they would do a preview of their issue 1. Mm-hmm. And both, Cullen and I and Oni, we all agreed, like, screw it, let's just put up the whole issue. Let's not cheat people out, because we felt pretty confident in what we had done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like if we get it in people's hands, then we'll secure a readership, and it worked, and we did. It was awesome.
Yeah. So do you think that played a factor in like the book? You guys finding success early, so you could continue it on past that first arc?
I do.
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. We got that book into so many, into the hands of so many more readers than we would have if we just launched it, without doing the free Comic Book Day issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know I can't remember what the print run was for Free Comic Book Day, but it was huge compared to what a print run would have been for an Oni book otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask about the ending, and I don't want to like spoil in the same sense we did with Bill John. I feel like Bill John, that spoiler like passes like the
Oh, it's fine, and it doesn't tell the whole story either. So
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But I'm definitely not going to go into any details of the Six Guns ending because I think the last trade just came out like the last couple months, I think. But
yeah, pretty recent.
so I wanted to say that, like, honestly, like, ending a story is incredibly difficult, and people who engage with any type of narrative is, people are always finicky. I mean, look at Lost. People are going to be talking about how much they hated Lost ending like 50 years from now because they saw it on Netflix 7.0 and they just thought it was disgusting. But I honestly thought the Six Guns ending was one of the best or actually, screw that, not even just comic book, like one of the best endings I've ever read in any story ever. I thought it was fantastic. And it not only because it was a good ending, but because it paid off so well off of who these characters were and what they were doing. But like I said, they're notoriously difficult. You guys said that you had a pretty clear vision as to what it was going to be early on. Did it shift at all as you went along, or was it something you guys struggled with once you got into that last issue, or did you maintain that clear vision throughout?
Well, I want to interrupt. I know Colin's got stuff to say, but I just want to say before we get there that you're right. I think that last issue is awesome. It's also the scariest thing I've ever done. I was just so scared of how people were going to react.
Oh yeah.
Because I was like, if we don't land this, I just wasted 7 years of my life. And so I was so scared about how it was gonna land. But you put the nail on the head there when you said, because it was about the characters. Cullen was just true to the characters' motivations. Mm-hmm. And everything else just sort of fell into place. I'm making it sound easier than it probably was for Cullen, but it felt like things fell into place because people did what they had to do because that was their character, and that's kind of that's where everything stemmed from. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to give Cullen some props before he talked about it. But go ahead. You asked if we were changing, if much had changed, right?
Yeah, basically how it shifted as you guys got closer, or if it shifted at all, or if it was just pretty much what you imagined from day one, Cullen.
Well, I think we were in the middle of working on maybe the issue 4 or 5, and Brian and I got, we got together and talked about how the series would end. Mm-hmm. If we had, if I think I even asked Brian, how many issues are you willing to do? Mm-hmm. And at the time it was 36. I remember that he said I can do 36 issues, and we just kind of started talking about where the series might go. Mm-hmm. And it was in broad strokes, but it was pretty. We settled on what we wanted to do with the book, pretty quickly, and we stuck with that. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, some elements changed, but not. We had new characters who were coming into the story and were playing a role. For instance, I may be misremembering, but when we first sat down and said this is what the story is going to be, Griselda wasn't part of that. Mm-hmm. She had not surfaced yet.
No. Yeah.
And so, but then as you see at the end, she is she's a major player in the final issue. Mm-hmm. So we came up with the big broad strokes and sort of the milestones along the way to where we wanted to go with the series. But we left ourselves enough wiggle room to add new characters in and add some new elements, within that framework. And then, as Brian said, we stuck with what the characters, we stuck with who the characters were, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like Colin said, we kept a lot of things pretty broad. We had like these certain signposts, mileposts we had to hit along the way, but we kept things kind of broad, and that just, I think, Cullen said it before, you don't want to have too tight of an outline for anything because it does kind of kill spontaneity and creativity. Mm-hmm. So you might have a better idea, and if your outline is working like clockwork, then you're kind of stuck. You can't take things out or move things around. So I think it's a bad idea to have too tight of an outline, especially I'm talking about for big stories, like a big arc,
right?
Not necessarily for issues such as sort of.
No, I think that's Joe R. Lansdale, who's a big inspiration for me as a writer. Mm-hmm. Once wrote somewhere, he wrote, "I don't do, heavy outlines or very detailed outlines because once I've told the story, I don't want to tell it again." Mm. And that's kind of for a big broad story like this, it's nice to have that freedom and that ability to surprise, to surprise each other and come up with these new elements that that add something new to the story, even though we've got an idea where we're going, but it just gives us it just makes it keeps it fresh.
Mm-hmm.
The one that leaps out to me, the example that I think of all when we talk about this is Cullen. It was that, I can't remember what the script it was, but it was the Winter Wolf story arc. And I remember he sent me one of the scripts, and I read it, and like I said, we meet. We talked about the overarching story, and then we would generally have like a serious meeting before every arc, and we would talk, we sort of hammer out some big things, and I would throw out some ideas, and he would throw out some ideas. But after that, I have no idea what Cullen's actually going to write. If he's going to use me of my ideas or the ones he had. Well, he sent me this one script, and I kind of thought I knew where things were going, but it opened up with this weird scene, this flashback scene, and I remember calling him after I read it, and I told him how that was awesome. That whole thing was awesome. And Cullen's like, yeah, I was nervous. He goes, because I kind of just made it up on the fly. and the scene I'm talking about, it's a flashback where we introduce the character of Abigail and the Wendigo, and like that whole thing with the stag with all the heads on its on its horns, and like he said, he sort of came up with that at the last minute, and he wasn't, like I say, he wasn't really sure how I was going to react to it. But to me, like that's some of the my favorite things. I don't want to know everything is what I'm getting. I like being kind of a first audience for some things, because if I get excited about it, then I feel like I can bring it.
And there's been a few times where I throw stuff in that I haven't even talked to Brian about. Because one of the things about me, and it's something I've recognized over the years, I hate describing my ideas to people. I hate it. I feel like if I were to sit down with Brian and say, Brian, I got this idea, and there's going to be a stag, and it has heads on its horns, I would feel like such an idiot the entire time I'm talking. I would be super uncomfortable.
You've been burned by me too many times.
Well, no, it's not like, even. It's just
going, oh, that's stupid.
It's like when my wife asks me, "What's this book you're working on about?" And I have to tell her what my books are, and every time I do, I feel like the biggest idiot on the planet. So I really don't. I don't love describing my ideas to people, and it's not that I feel uncomfortable when I'm doing it, and a lot of times I just don't, and then I write it into the script and hope that Brian's going to go for it. In the case of the scene he's talking about, it was completely on the fly. I was like, I need to fill up a couple pages here, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I just kind of just went for it. Just wrote the scene without really. It was one of those times where I had pages that weren't necessarily outlined, so I just wrote a scene that had nothing to do with what I had originally planned for that issue necessarily, and it just worked. But I kind of like to surprise my collaborators. Brian is the one who I try to surprise the most. But yeah, I kind of like being able to just that he's open. I like that he's open to me surprising him with some of this stuff, and it's the kind of thing I can't necessarily do. You can only do those kind of things in a creator-owned book,
right? As
a writer, I mean that kind of stuff only works. The magic really only works for that kind of thing in a creator-owned book.
Yeah, one thing all of what you guys are saying actually really ties into one of the things I like the most about the book, and it feels really organic. It feels like everything is kind of building off of each other as you're going along, and even if it is kind of impromptu, it feels, like the stag. It feels like it fits. It feels like it belongs to that world, and it's not necessarily something that it's not impacting where you're going in the end, but it impacts where I go as a reader, and Brian is the first audience. And I think it just adds a lot to it, and it makes it all feel a lot more natural. Now,
well, I was just going to say that. No, that's awesome to hear, because that's exactly our goal, especially in those sort of moments, is to make it as real and as part of everything gets the same sort of weight as far as the kind of work I put into it and Cullen puts into it. So yeah, I want everything to. We both feel that way. We want everything to feel of a piece, and. And for people not to question it really and go, oh yeah, that works. Like if we told you we're going to have, a 9-foot mummy in a West, robbing a train, like that might sound ridiculous or like, come on, that's, you guys just jumped the shark. But so it's better, to, like Colin said, it's better we just show you.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
and commit to it.
yeah, and it's that all comes across in it, and I think that's one of the things about world building that people. People talk about how world building is great and everything like that, and it is great. But the thing is to me, world building only really works if it feels natural, and if it doesn't, sometimes you can see world building when you're just like, this just feels like it's kind of in your face, and it feels like it's kind of taking me out of the story instead of really working. But world building, like you're literally building a world, it makes everything feel like it belongs in a place, and I don't know. I guess that it worked for me with what you guys were doing.
I think one of the things you're sort of, at least the way I read it, what you're pointing at, I think there's a lot of people who do world building almost like in a fetishistic way.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
Or where they feel like they need to explain every ounce of it. There's a lot of exposition, and they lay it all out for you cleanly. Whereas Cullen is so good at just like teasing little things and kind of letting you figure it out and you think about. And he does the same thing, not just with the world building. He does the same thing with characters. I've always felt like Cullen is. Of all the writers I've worked with, he writes the least amount of dialogue, but it gets more across because it's sort of character-based dialogue, and so much of a lot of times what a character is what they don't say, or
right.
What I mean, or the silences and that sort of thing, and I don't know, I feel like Cullen sort of nails that aspect of it.
Sometimes, sometimes I do okay.
Well, yeah, I mean,
but part of it, what Brian just described is absolutely, it's the stuff as much as I love world building, the stuff I can't stand when I'm reading a book is where it's really over described.
Right. As a reader, you're thinking, oh, look at all this world building.
And that would, to me, it knocks me right out of the story. So, for instance, Brian was the one who came to me and said, "Hey, let's put a mummy." in issue 8 or whatever, let's do this mummy, and I don't remember if he was inspired by adding the mummy because on the first issue there's something we talk about, a 9-foot mystery, one of the wagons has a 9-foot mystery mummy, or he just wanted to draw a mummy. I don't know. I can't remember.
I do remember. I remember it pretty well. I remember because we knew we were doing. We knew we were putting our characters on a train. We knew we wanted to do a train robbery, or basically a train robbery type scene, a train fight. We knew we were doing that. We just didn't know who the guys were that were attacking the train.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think it was in the back of both of our minds. We're kind of thinking about it, and then I just love the idea of, I was, again, it's that sort of thing. Cullen, as a writer, planted all these little seeds just in the first 2 or 3 pages of the very first issue.
Mm-hmm. And
it was enough that kind of gets your imagination going. So I had not forgotten about this character, this Asher Cobb, the Knife of the Mummy. I was like, what if we bring him back? and luckily Cullen was for it. And then,
right.
That was the surprises where that was a character we had no intention of being part of the series. But then we fell in love with the character, and readers fell in love with the character, and
but if we had tried when that mummy jumps onto the train, if we'd have stopped the story at that moment to say, and mummies can exist in this world because, and then go into a long, drawn out, explanation of how a mummy is in the Old West, jumping on a train. I mean, if we'd have done that, it would have knocked readers out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, we have just a moment where they're like, there's a mummy. And they're like, yep. And to me, that tells more about the world anyway, that it's a world where people can accept that there's mummies, that these characters can just accept that and move on. And I feel like that's all the reader. I mean, the reader knows what a mummy is. And at that point, they're with us or they're not. So, I don't want to dwell on over describing the mummy. Now, later on, we tell Asher Cobb's origin story, but we don't stop the story when he's jumping on a train, which is what the most important moment, thing at that moment is. There's a mummy jumping on a train. That's right. That's the thing that you want to stick with.
And if you're listening to this and you haven't read the Sixth Gun, I promise it works.
It does. It does work. And that mummy has a pretty great name. I like the names, like Gord Cantrell and Asher Cobb. Great names. Really great names. But this is a perfect transition to Damned because The Damned is a comic. It's like it's a crime story that has demons in it, and it has the main character is a guy named Eddie who has cuts all over his face because he can't die and he has the scars to prove it. I mean, it's like the difference between like your brain asking why versus just accepting it as it is. And the Damned is not, it's like our world, but it's not really, because my boss is not a literal demon. I can't prove it, but I don't think he's a literal demon. What made you guys want to dive back into this world and like this Eddie's life? Let's start with you, Cullen.
Well, I just want to back up real quick and say, look, jump on what Cullen was saying earlier. Like, The Damned is, for me, the most embarrassing book to describe, because it sounds ridiculous. But again, I feel like no, but you gotta read it. Like, there's demons and there's gangsters. And
what's awesome is when we go to conventions and we sit at the table together, Brian gets to hear, because Brian's usually working on commissions or something. It's his little secret. He doesn't like describing the books, so he draws. And when the people come and say, "Tell me what The Damned's about," he gets to hear me describe The Damned about 300 times over the weekend, or The Six Gun, and it's always the same, because it is uncomfortable. It's hard to describe some of these things. But as far as I'm concerned, there's never really been a question that either one of us. I mean, we definitely wanted to return to The Damned, and we've talked about The Damned since we did 8 issues of this series originally, and we have talked about that series continuing since that time. I mean, we've always talked about returning to it.
Well, I mean, yeah, nothing else. We just made a lot of promises to people over the years that we would. So,
right.
So yeah, and we want to. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, and we love these characters. Coming back to them after a while and writing them is a little weird for me. I mean, it takes a little getting used to returning to these characters. But we love these characters just like we love the characters in The Six Gun. And just like The Six Gun, these are characters, some of them that we've also had plans for almost 10 years. Yeah.
And we kind of want to see that through.
Well, one thing I really like, I actually thought of the perfect phrase that I should have used earlier when I was trying to say how organic The Six Gun felt is the Damned feels lived in. It feels like a living, breathing world that you just happen to kind of drop in and get into this world, and like all of its different players. Like you have people talked about that don't show up until later, and like in the first story, God, what was the name?
I like to think it's The Wire.
Oh, it's
Prohibition era monster gangster movies.
Yeah. I mean, but it works really. It works exactly like that, because you have all these like gangsters that have like rep, and they get talked about in hushed tones, or like the other gangsters talk negatively about them, and then you meet them and you're like, oh, this guy is exactly what he was talking about. But I as a reader, I love that. But it's going to be, I don't want you guys to spoil anything, and I don't want to talk about plot too much, but you're getting back into this world. And you have a new ongoing coming out in May after the new the trade paperback collecting the original stuff comes out, which is I have to applaud you guys. $9.99. It's going to get you guys a lot of new readers, which I think is fantastic. But what is the new series going to be all about? Is it still going to be about Eddie's life in this world, or is it going to be kind of just exploring this world in a different sense?
Go ahead, Colin.
Well, The Damned, it does focus on Eddie's life, and it does, after that the initial trade, we pick the story up from that moment, and we have a bigger story in mind for The Damned, and there are things that we're seeding in that very first that first arc play into a story that's going to be, if we have our druthers, will be, several arcs long, several arcs worth of story, and it's all stuff that we have been, we've been planning, and we wanted to see, and it all basically hinges on Eddie and his relation to this world of demons, and really, I kind of see it as this guy trying to play with the big boys. He really has no business playing the demons game, but he's doing everything he can to play the demon's game. And he's already, when we meet Eddie, he's already lost so much. I mean, he's been losing at that game for a long time. And this is really sort of a story of this guy who's been gambling against these demons and losing for so long, and really trying to find a way to finally get a winning hand.
Mm-hmm. The way you describe it, actually, I don't know if you guys ever read there was a comic Bill Willingham did back before Fables. It was called Proposition Player, and it actually kind of like vaguely reminds me of that. But and like you were saying, you can actually see like a lot of the overarching story you guys are building to, and kind of built around his relationship with them, and also the deal he originally struck for his, whatever the exact deal he struck originally, but. For you, Brian, getting back into this world, Colin already said it's been interesting getting back into it for him. But I've loved seeing kind of the preview stuff you've been doing on Twitter, where you're posting some of the stuff you've been inking, everything. It looks fantastic, and I love seeing ink work for people. For you, getting back into that world, has it been pretty seamless, or has it been a little bit of transition from all the dust and dirt of the world of the Six Gun?
I don't think going from any one project to another is ever going to be seamless, because they're such different beasts in their own way. But I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit of a challenge, but I'm so excited to be working on it, because again, these are characters we created and have lived with for almost a decade now, and it's so much fun to basically as much as I like that first book, I have a hard time looking at my art. I think most artists are like that.
It's a very common story.
Yeah. And so there's that part of me is like, now I'm going to show them what I can do now. You know what I mean? I want to be like, I want to show the same characters and sort of reacquaint myself with them, but also show that I've learned something in the past, 1,200 pages of comics I've done since the last time I worked on this project. But no, I mean, I am literally working on it as we're speaking right now. I'm penciling a page, and I'm loving it. I've already seen a few scripts from Cullen, and again, it's there's a certain amount of surprises in there for me as well, and it's pretty exciting. Like Cullen, you just wrote a script which you told me. I've never been meaning to ask you this. You said you felt like it went a bit off the rails. Does that mean it went away from your outline? Because it's a great script.
It just didn't go. I mean,
I know you didn't mean it got bad. I knew.
No, it didn't get bad. It's just and not to, this won't spoil anything, but there are characters that show up at the end of that script that are going to be big players now. That their position, they have to be big players in the book, and they were not. When I sat down and when I wrote page 1 of that script. That character was nowhere in my mind, and that character just sort of surfaced as I was writing it. So that's when I say things are getting off the rails. That's probably why. I'm getting surprised by characters who are popping up out of nowhere in directions it's going. And it's an interest to me. One, it's returning to this world is a little weird to me. It's. I don't feel like I've got my feet under me yet with it, but it's also I'm really trying hard from a tone perspective. I don't want this book. It's not the same kind of book as the Six Gun. The Six Gun is a book with big action and this bombastic swashbuckling moments, and The Damned was never about that. So I'm sitting there writing a script for Brian, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, here comes the golden train, and I was like, oh wait, there's
wrong
no
book.
gold. Yeah, that's the wrong book, and that's a little odd to me. So I write these scripts, and I'm like, it doesn't feel like the scripts I've been writing for Brian for the past 6 years. It feels like a different script, even though these are very similar. It's a similar kind of story to what Brian and I first started working on together. It's just taking a lot of it takes some getting used to.
Yeah, and honestly, that's one of the things I'm actually kind of excited about. I did just do 50 issues of a lot of swashbuckling and kind of epic action set pieces, and so I was excited to get to something that is more just tonally dark and I won't say more character driven, because Six Gun's character driven too, but you're not going to have those giant not saying there won't be action sequences, but you're not going to have just a ton of like in your face sort of epic swashbuckling scenes. It's more about the mood of this world and this characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to a certain degree, I mean, I'm not trying to make it seem like it's like a silent book or something like that, but I kind of feel like having Eddie as a lead, he's kind of, when I think of him like, you know, kind of walking around with like a cigarette in his mouth and kind of observing and being kind of more, I don't know, he's got a more quiet nature to him. In the book, it, you know, kind of takes on to a certain degree his personality. And I think it works really well with that, but it definitely has a different feel than the Six Gun. But one thing I wanted to ask is, well, it's not going to be totally similar. Like, did you guys find that as you worked on a long form project, it was 50 issues plus all the spin-offs and everything like that. Did you find that you were finding kind of efficiencies and different ways that you could work together that you guys are carrying over to The Damned after working on such a big project?
I don't know if there's anything efficient or any more efficient about the way
there's nothing efficient about
there's absolutely nothing efficient about the way we work. No, I don't think there's anything more efficient. I don't feel like I'm lying when I say this, but honestly, like our relationship, the way we work, hasn't really changed much since the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if maybe Cullen has a different viewpoint of it, but
I don't feel like my scripts have changed. I don't shorthand my scripts for Brian.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't let it. No, I wouldn't let that.
I don't know that there's any. There's really not a lot of things that we do differently. I can't say that I don't. When I write a script for Brian, there are things I can take into account that I know Brian can do or is not going. That Brian likes to do. That I don't necessarily get to do in other books. I'm looking at The Damned right now, and looking at, these 6 and 7 panel pages. and a lot of editors on non-creator owned books that I work on frown on anything over 5 panels.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big no-no. While Brian is the guy who always like, can I add a panel in here? I'll write a 7 panel page thinking someone's going to complain, and he comes back and says, do you mind if I add 3 panels to this page?
I wouldn't know what to do with the page if Cullen only gave me 5 panels. Like, mm-hmm. I'd be like, now what would I do with the second half of the page?
Right.
Honestly, it's an aesthetic thing. I like the look and the way, the feel of it, and the sort of making the story a little denser. But it's a real estate thing too. We have only so much room to tell a story. Let's not waste it on splash pages and over the top panels and that sort of thing. Let's just stick to the story,
right?
And get as much story in there as we can. And I actually think working like that, there are panels from the 6 Gun that in my mind are splash pages, and I go back and look, and I'm like, that was only a half-page splash. Like, it wasn't even a splash page.
Mm-hmm.
But it works because of the company it's keeping all these smaller panels and everything, and it's breaking away from that format. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of splash pages, mm-hmm. and I love 6 is a very great number for panels on a page. Anywhere between 6 and 9, I'm pretty comfortable there.
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of artists who would disagree with you, just because a lot of artists come up, and they, you look at conventions and stuff.
A lot of artists are babies.
but no, I'm like, you talk about editors who go to conventions and they look at some artists, and a lot of times what they're giving is a bunch of pinups and stuff like that. They don't really learn the storytelling to it. And you were part of Periscope, or what is Helioscope, for a bit, weren't you, Brian?
I'm sort of and they can write in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I'm kind of an honorary member.
Yeah. But
I visit Portland a lot, and I've worked at the studio quite a bit. Yeah.
And I've had Steve Lieber on my show, and he's somebody who speaks to the he will always talk about how storytelling first for artists, and I think a lot of times, I'm not saying that every page should be like 64 panels and like maximize all the story you can possibly do or something like that, but I do think sometimes when you read a comic, it can feel like when it's 5 or less panels, it can feel like you're kind of getting rushed through the story. And sometimes that was one thing I really liked about the way you guys handled the Six Gun, and the same for the Damned, is I felt like you guys controlled pacing really well with that, and it made it feel like I was much more immersed in the story because of it, because of the way you guys kind of delivered the story.
Well, thanks. I mean, again, a lot of that credit goes to Cullen as far as the pacing and stuff. But yeah, that's. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. I was reading. I don't know. I've been Cullen's kind of done the same thing, but I've been binding up old comics.
Okay.
Into hardback editions so that I can actually, find them and read them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like last few nights I've been reading, I don't know why, but I've been reading Fantastic Four comics from the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, like the average page count or panel count in those books is like 8 or 9 panels, and there's so much text, and they're so dense. It like literally like I a couple times I wanted to like just call Cullen and go, you won't just believe what happened on this page, and then recite basically a 3-act structure that's done like in 9 panels because they fit
Right.
story in there. I'm not saying it's well done, but I'm just saying it's amazing what was the norm back then. And I kind of miss that. I kind of miss getting sort of immersed in a comic rather than just sort of breezing through it.
Mm-hmm. I remember, like last year, I've never read the Kree Skrull War, the Avengers story. And,
Mm-hmm.
and it, it's one of those things that's always kind of bandied about. It's like one of the best stories ever in Marvel. And I remember getting on my iPad, and I was going to read on Marvel Unlimited, and I started reading the first thing, and it was so dense. I was like,
Yeah.
what am I looking at? Like, it kind of felt like I was reading in a completely different medium. And incredibly enough, I still have not read it because I was like, I have to be ready for this. And it's funny how that works. It's like my mind has been trained to expect less than that, but back then that was kind of the norm, or maybe not the norm, but more accepted.
I just recently dug out. I was getting because I'm getting some books ready to be bound, and I dug out my Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh yeah,
the original miniseries, and that it's the craziest. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I mean, we're talking 10-panel pages and 50 characters. I mean, there's so much going on every page, and it's I can't remember if it was a good story or not. I remember it impacted me when I was a kid, but visually it's something spectacular to look at. That the kind of stuff that's drawn on the page.
I feel so stupid. Was that George Perez?
That was George Perez. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know this, but he drew these. He drew the Fantastic Four issues I've been reading. I didn't realize he had a run on Fantastic Four. But yeah, inked by, and I could be pronouncing this wrong, but inked by Joe Sinnott. Sonat. Yeah, so it doesn't really look like George Perez, but you can kind of see the early. But yeah, there's a lot going on those pages. They're very George Perez looking.
I feel like as a guy who likes backgrounds, I feel like George Perez is your kind of guy.
I've never read a George Perez thing until that.
Oh wow!
I was never a DC guy, so I didn't I wasn't familiar with the Titans or Wonder Woman or the Crisis or any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I never read George Perez.
I mean, speaking about Crisis, I mean, I'm not saying that you should have to go out and buy it right now, but one of the amazing things about that series is, like you were saying, Cullen, it's pretty dense. It's got a lot going on, but I mean, the art is so dense in that. It's amazing how much George gets onto those pages. I like how I'm calling him George as if we're like best friends.
Yeah.
Well, I just have, I really only have one more question for you, and I wanted to ask about, we've talked about it a bit. You guys created a long-form creator-owned story during a time where, we're kind of in an era of renumberings and relaunches and more comics that are being published than ever. It's really hard for a comic that's been around for even 20 issues to get like any of the air in the room because it's all being sucked up by a lot of other things. Not saying that's good or bad, but I could imagine that would be difficult at times because at 50 issues, your book was ancient relative to a lot of other books in the market. For you guys, how difficult was it to maintain interest in the Six Gun the further it got into the series? And did that inform at all kind of like how you guys are approaching The Damned as an ongoing series, or not really?
I would say just the way the market works. What readers we're going to pick up for a monthly book.
Mm-hmm.
Those happen in the first couple months. And you basically, and everybody knows this, your numbers just sort of stagnate and slowly drop from there. So once you get to a certain point, I mean, even issue 7 or 8, you're very not very likely to be bringing on at least new monthly readers, and it's impossible. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to cover our book in general, but especially if you've been around for a couple of years, you're not new. You're not what's new, and but fortunately, the trade market is strong and thriving, and we've had a pretty good, we've had a very good word of mouth. I would say that's most of our, most of our new readers are word of mouth and trade readers, which is great, works for us. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that, Cullen. I mean, have you had any different thoughts about how we're approaching the Damned? I know that Oni is really pulling all the stops out, and they've got a really great plan as far as marketing and making sure people do see this book from early stage.
I mean,
other than that, I don't have much control.
Yeah, I mean, the things we're doing, like releasing this trade at a lower price point to jump, to get people jump back into the series, and then launching, basic, we could have launched the Damned #1 and reprinted, the first issue of the Damned that we did.
Sure.
That could have been our plan. But instead we want to start, we want to do the trade at a lower price point and then launch the Damned with a new #1, something that no one's seen, something no one's seen before, and jump into the series that way. And those are all, ways to get some new readers onto the book and get eyes on the book. As Brian said, the first 2 issues, that's about as much, if it's all word of mouth, because from a press perspective, we're going to get a couple of issues worth of press. People are going to talk about it for a couple of issues. I think we found with the Six Gun, and I feel like I've had a lot of talks with other writers and artists who are doing creator-owned books, and this, creator-owned books that are well respected. And this is what the frustrating thing is. It gets to the point that even reviewers aren't going to review the book, or you'll get a review that says, I haven't looked at this book in 7 or 8 months. It's still good. And it's almost like a good book kind of gets overlooked because they know they're not going to find anything.
It's taken for granted. Yeah.
It's taken for granted that it's going to be a good book. And, not to say, I don't want it to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I mean, The Six Gun was a great book, and I stand by every issue of that series. I think every issue was solid, and it gets frustrating that you can't get people to talk about it sometimes, but it's also just part of it. It's what you have to do.
The exception being, and I think this is a lot of frustration. I know just creator-owned folks have is sometimes it's very hard to get coverage unless you have a movie or a TV option attached to your project. And we did have that, briefly had the TV pilot being filmed for Six Gun, and we got coverage, and our sales did go up. We actually did, our monthly sales went up a little bit, and our trade sales exploded even more. So, So you're frustrated with it, and at the same time, you're like, oh, thank God it happened.
Right, yeah.
But
I mean, it would be lovely if it didn't, it wasn't a TV thing that helps you get that kind of buzz. But in the comic book industry, it's not just being a comic book isn't always enough.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. And part of it's because there's so much stuff being published right now from so many different publishers. Part of it is it's just the kind of stuff that is that reviewers and the media is enamored by the TV and the flashy TV and movie stuff as well.
Well, even beyond that, like I used to be part of Multiversity Comics. Who I quick shout out my guy Mark Tweedale. You guys did a hell of a thing with him.
He's great.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Mark's great. Yeah. Mark's awesome, and he's one of the guys who's really helps. That's the word to me. I throw that right into the stuff he's done. We did all this stuff with Mark for the Six Gun, and Mark's doing similar things now with another book I'm doing called a book titled Harrow County. He's doing similar things with Harrow County now, and to me that to me counts more as almost a word of mouth kind of thing than just being. I don't want to. I feel like saying that's just media coverage is almost too cold for the kind of thing that Mark's doing.
Yeah, I mean it's really in depth. It's like kind of like a director's commentary with you guys.
Yeah,
which I think is really great. But I mean that's the thing is as somebody who used to do reviews on the regular, it gets pretty difficult to kind of come up. And this is horrible because it really shouldn't be this way, but I know a lot of people struggle with coming up with new things to say about books that have been around for forever, that have been consistently good. It's like you guys are a metronome, and you guys will almost be better off in the reviewer's eyes to have a horrible issue, because then they're like, wait a second, what happened to the Six Gun? It's not good anymore.
And then we can have that they're back on track issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something that
after a bad issue.
You know what? Well, I think we ought to start planning our bad damned issue.
Yeah, it's.
Wait, I'm drawing it.
It's the low quality variant.
The low quality. Oh my god, I would review the hell out of it and rake you guys over the coals for that.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. We got to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, it is kind of interesting seeing that, because it's you see it across every type of book, and you see that for creator-owned books too. But I mean, like, you look at Marvel and DC, they ran into the same thing. It's like, how do you get somebody to buy issue 960 of Amazing Spider-Man? It's a lot easier to get them to buy a new #1, and that can be difficult for people like you guys who are like running issue number 48 of the Six Gun out or something like that. But I don't know. It's interesting, and I'm always curious as to, like, I did a big piece on it when I was running my site Sketched, and it was all about how things are changing for long form storytelling in comics. And I don't know. I'm glad you guys persevered, because it was a hell of a thing at the end.
Well, and believe me, we talked about it, because there were. I can't remember, Brian. Did Oni ever suggest a reboot at some point? Was that ever discussed,
yes.
like a new #1? And I know Brian was always adamantly against it.
Mm-hmm.
I could have probably been convinced, but Brian wouldn't go for it. I'm really glad he didn't.
Yeah, for me, I couldn't do it, and I completely understand from a business point of view, maybe I could have been talked into it, because I can see reason, but I didn't want to do it because it made no sense.
Right.
The story it's a train on a track, and it's got point A and a point B, and there's no point, unless it made story sense. There's no reason to stop in the middle and call it a reboot, because it reminds me, like, constantly you'd see these little write-ups. It's a great jumping on issue,
right?
For Six Gun. Cullen and I are always like, there is a great jumping on issue.
That was #1.
Let's be honest. There's no other good not for a story like this. It's not episodic in that way. So yeah, I mean, I want people to discover the book any way they can, but yeah, you really should start with issue 1.
I remember I saw somebody tweet like something about, like, I think it was about the Wicked and the Divine, and they were like, what issue should I start on? And I remember I wanted to just tweet back to them and say #1, but it was just, it seemed so obvious. I kind of felt like it was kind of a weird
You thought
thing.
you might be snarky?
Yeah, it might have been snarky, and I'm like, I mean that in a genuine way. But that is one thing that is really great, is like, you guys had the trade paperbacks, you guys had hardcovers, right, for Six Gun?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
And one thing,
beautiful hardcover.
You guys had a very, like, unique experience for me, because I had I live in Anchorage, Alaska, where we have hardship, and we have dog sleds, and we have Diamond having an issue getting comics sometimes.
I assume you live there because you're on the run from the federal government.
I can't talk about it, but let's just say David Harper is not my real name.
Right. I just assume that's the only reason anybody lives in Alaska. Exactly. But go ahead. Yeah, hardship.
Well, I was going to say, like, I started with the Free Comic Book Day book, and I read the first, I think, like 28 issues, all in single issues. And then the comic, the number 29 was shorted, and they didn't get it. And I special ordered it, and they still never got it. And I ended up reading the rest of the series in digital trades, which I think is really kind of funny, because there's so many different ways to read a comic these days that it's nice you guys are actually providing options, because everybody reads differently. And I bet you guys, the hardcovers probably brought in a different type of readers you might not have gotten otherwise.
Oh yeah. I think so. It's interesting. You definitely get to experience the book along with the readers, and experience it, how different readers are getting into it, because the hardcover, the series in hardcover hasn't been completely released yet. I mean, we're only halfway there when you talk about the hardcovers, and we get a lot of people who are like, well, I can't read any more of the book until the next hardcover comes out, and they're they're going to have to wait a while longer
Yeah.
to get the next chapter. So it's interesting to
I'm working on it.
interact with those people.
Get off
Yeah.
my back, everybody. Everybody's waiting on me to finish covers. That's why I'm.
Is that what we're waiting on?
Yeah.
Oh,
Get back to work,
I had no
Brian.
idea.
What are you doing here?
Matter of fact, I am working. After I've finished working on this Dan page, I'm working on the cover to Volume 4 hardcover Gunslinger. I'm inking that this evening.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
it is moving. It is moving along. Yeah. But no, you're right. I mean, there's so many different ways to experience comics, and I really feel like the whole market is in flux right now.
Mhm.
If you look at, I mean, we're going to look at like this 10, 15 year period of time and saying like, oh, that's where everything changed, because I don't know how long. I mean, I kind of feel like the big ongoing comic is dead. I mean, like you said, Marvel and DC even reboot their characters every year or two now. So, yeah, I think that sort of long form, super long form, 100+ issues. I think that's dying. But I think there's a lot still to be done in digital and other forms of release. But no, I don't know. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited. Anybody reads my books, no matter how they read them. So.
Right.
Well, I'm excited to pick up the Damned #1 in May, and thank you guys so much for coming on. I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do next.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for having us. I
Really
really
appreciate
appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with storytellers Brian Hurtt and Cullen Bunn. You can find Brian on Twitter at @BryHurt and Cullen on his website at cullenbunn.com and on Twitter at @CullenBunn. You can find their work in the recently wrapped The Sixth Gun and the upcoming revival The Damned at Oni Press. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen, as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.